Good day. As is now traditional, I will start this program with
Just let me get this straight. You're gonna unleash these monsters. Alexis, Charlie, Vio, Wendy? They're not fucking up the outside world because they're in here. They can't hurt anyone here.
I think the world can handle Charlie fucking my... Who am I kidding? You don't give a shit about what's out there.
But you do. Think for a minute, okay? This is a mistake.
At least I'm consistent.
Ah!
the quick review of the situation on the Ukrainian battlefronts. And it's become quite clear to me over the last few hours that the main focus of the fighting continues to be and remains the Bakhmut area of Donbass. I say that because there's been a fair amount of reports now about the progress of the Russian offensive in Zaporozhye, and from what I can understand, the Russians are now steadily clearing, or perhaps more accurately, taking under control various villages and settlements in the Orekhov area before taking steps to perhaps encircle that particular town, the town of Orekhov. And there's also further reports that the Russians are now consolidating their advance towards Zaporozhye. But I get the sense that this is an offensive being carried out by only a fraction of the Russian forces. The main Russian offensive surely is going to come when those 150,000, 160,000 troops that the Russians are in the process of training up, reorganizing in new units, when those troops are able to join the battle. And it's now expected that that will be around March. Way back a few weeks ago, Lieutenant Colonel Alex Vershinin said that if the Russians do continue to follow military logic as opposed to political logic, in other words, if they take the advice of the military staffs rather than trying to accelerate events by trying to follow politically determined timetables, they would wait until March before launching any big offensives, because that would be the time when these military units, these new military units that have been built up since the mobilization in September are ready to go into battle. And I get the sense that this is exactly what is happening. Now, in the meantime, the Russians, as I said, are pressing forward incrementally in Zaporozhye. As I said, they do seem to be clearing locations around Orekhov. They're pushing towards Zaporozhye city along the east bank of the Dnieper River. And just before this program began, there were further reports, this time from the militia leader, the senior militia officer of the Donbass militia, the Donetsk militia, the head of the Vostok battalion, Alexander Khodorkovsky, who is, by the way, one of the more reliable commentators on the Russian side of what is actually happening on the battlefields. Khodorkovsky says that he and other Russian forces have received an order to resume the advance on Vuhledar, and that fighting has already started there, and that the Russians are making progress, and that the Ukrainians in this area were caught by surprise. Now, I'm not by any means sure that this is the case. I mean, this is, of course, Khodorkovsky who's saying this. I wonder whether the Ukrainians were, in fact, caught by surprise in exactly the way that they say. But anyway, that is what Khodorkovsky is saying. Now, that means that we have Russian advances in Zaporozhye, a Russian advance of some kind around Vuhledar, and, well, a few days ago I talked about some kind of Ukrainian counterattack in the Svatovo-Kremenaya area. Well, that doesn't seem to have gone very far, and from what I've been able to gather, the Russians are back on the attack in that area as well. But all of these attacks in Zaporozhye region, in southern Donetsk region around Vuhledar, in Kremenaya, Svatovo, they all seem to be tactical advances, if I can use that term. I'm probably using that expression wrongly, but I hope you will understand what I mean. In other words, advances carried out by limited forces, certainly not an advance by hundreds of thousands of men intended to break Ukrainian defenses, to roll up Ukrainian forces. So what is the purpose of all of these attacks? Well, Ryan Beletic at the New Atlas yesterday gave a series of explanations of what it is that the Russians might be doing in all of these various attacks in places like Zaporozhye and Vuhledar and Svatovo-Kremenaya. And he suggested that they could be reconnaissance in force, or they could be the Russians pushing forward in order to take control of more areas in what's called the grey zone. In other words, advance their front lines further forward in anticipation of whatever counteroffensive the Ukrainians might be thinking of launching in time. And of course, a third possibility is that these are indeed offensives intended to capture and control territory. I think that's probably correct on all fronts, but I would say that, in my opinion, there is another motivation, and it is, I suspect, the bigger one, which is to maintain pressure on Ukraine all across the front line, whilst the big battle, the really important battle, the Battle of Bakhmut, continues and evolves into and until the Russians are able to fully secure control not just of Bakhmut, but of the very large Ukrainian forces, are able to defeat the very large Ukrainian forces in and around Bakhmut conclusively. I say that because, in fact, over the last couple of hours, even whilst there's been a lot of discussion about the advances in Zaporozhye especially, the information about Vuhledar has only just come through. There's actually been quite a lot of information about what's been going on around Bakhmut. The first thing I would say is that I've now seen video film of fighting inside the village of Krasnaya Gora, which is located to the north of Bakhmut, basically between Bakhmut and Soledar. And I've also seen more reports